It is 6 o'clock. Let the meeting come to order. The clerk will please call the roll.
Mr. Herring.
Here.
Ms. Nelson.
Here.
Mrs. Shormilly.
Here.
Mr. Nelson.
Here.
Mr. Pauling.
Here.
Mr. Wong. Mrs. Myers.
Here.
Mrs. Moorhead. Mr. Runyon.
Here.
Madden. Mr. Odell. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Quorum being present, this is a duly constituted meeting of the Prairie Village City Council. Will you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag
Of the United States and to the
republic
republic
for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First item of business is the approval of the agenda. Are there any items that needed to be added to the agenda this evening? Being none, I will accept a motion for the approval of the agenda as presented.
I move the approval of the agenda as presented.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. Do we have any students or scouts in our audience this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on to presentations. We are very pleased to have our Johnson County Commission Chairman joining us tonight, Ed Eilert, and also Paul Welcome, our Johnson County Appraiser. Thank you both for coming this evening. Mr. Eilert, are you going to start off with our dark store theory?
Yes, Mayor, thank you very much. Council members, appreciate the opportunity to visit with you a few minutes this evening about a subject that we've been looking at the county, and it involves the appraisal of commercial property and theories that are being advanced to reduce those commercial values to a significant extent. This is not just an issue that's affecting Johnson County or the state of Kansas. About a month ago, I spent about 45 minutes on a conference call with 20 or 25 other commissioners from Midwest states, all the way from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. These are valuation theories that are being advanced and that are impacting counties across the Midwest and soon across the country, perhaps. I should note there is a county in Wisconsin, I believe it is, who's having a ballot issue letting the public vote as to whether these types of theories should be advanced for the valuation of commercial properties. But there's two general theories. One is called vacant stores or dark stores. The second is a lease fee approach. And both of these are hypothetical conditions. And I think we all know what hypothetical means. It's not real, it's made up. But let me give you a definition. Hypothetical conditions are contrary to facts known about the physical, legal, economic characteristics of subject property or conditions external to the property, such as market conditions or trends. That comes from the appraiser's practices manual. These theories have not been adopted by any professional property appraisal group, and therefore they continue to be looked at and evaluated. In the state of Kansas, Johnson County has had two appeals of various commercial properties, and the Board of Tax Appeals have referenced these theories in making their decision. So if that continues in the state of Kansas, there's going to be a significant impact on counties as well as municipal governments. Let me tell you exactly what those are. The vacant store or dark store theory says this, that even though Ed's big box store has thousands of customers come through the door every week, it has to be valued as though there is no business, that it's empty, that it's only a roof sides and property. Well, that's hypothetical in the nth degree, I would say. And but using that theory, they might be able to reduce their property values by 30–40%. Now, so far in the state of Kansas, even though the Board of Tax Appeals has used that term, the judgment that's been made so far is kind of the first cousin of the dark store theory, and that is the lease fee approach. And what does that mean? Well, Ed's Big Box Store has a 25-year lease on the corner of 119th and Metcalf. But when I come in to the Board of Tax Appeals, I say, no, this property needs to be valued as though the lease is only 2 or 3 years. And if I'm not there in 2 or 3 years, then the value of the property goes down, and that's the value that I should be taxed on. So again, you might have a 30 or 40% reduction in the property value. Again, they're not real. Those theories there's no real application. Even though my lease is 25 years, I'm saying my property should be valued as though the lease is only 2 or 3 years. Another way to approach that theory, it's not unusual in some cases for various types of businesses to require deed restrictions on their property. For instance, Ed's Big Box Store, if I lease that property, I want my landlord to put in a restriction that no other big box store can use that property for 25 years, even if I'm not there. And we have an example in Johnson County. In Olathe, there was a Walmart store located at the corner of Merlin and 135th, had a deed restriction. That store moved about a mile further east to another location, and so no other big box store could come into that old location. So I think there's a small retailer, a Goodwill store, and so now the big box store is saying, hey, that's the real value of the property, not when I was there. And so the value of my current property needs to be reduced. That's the simple explanation of those two theories. Try to make sense out of them and you get a migraine very, very easily. But it's a theory that's being advanced. I have also shared with you some data. It should be at your places. If these theories were to be adopted and used going forward, they probably would be applied to just about any commercial property across the county or across the state. If I'm already CVS and Walgreens have used this approach for their stores, and certainly the CVS and the Walgreens I shop at can't be considered big box stores. So with that trend in place, you could probably even see commercial office buildings advance the theory to reduce their valuations. So what we've done, we've gone through every taxing jurisdiction in Johnson County and looked at the classes of properties where this theory might be applied, and used a 30% reduction in the valuations, and showing you what the revenue loss for each taxing jurisdiction would be. Obviously, the biggest revenue loss is by the school districts. And you can look at each school district there. I think Shawnee Mission would lose about, is that $11 million? A little under $11 million. This is annual loss of revenue. The total for our school districts, the 6 in Johnson County, would be about $32 million. Then you have the state of Kansas, who has a 20 mil levy, which is applied against all property. and that is used to support the state's funding formula for schools across the state. So the state of Kansas itself would lose about $15 million a year just from that mill levy. Troy Village, the loss is estimated at about $271,000, but I would draw your attention to Consolidated Fire District Number 2, who would lose about $460,000 or $500,000 of revenue that they would not have available to them. So overall, throughout the county, it's about $100 million. We've calculated this on a 30% drop in value. Before the Senate Tax Committee, the head of the State Appraisers Association from Douglas County estimated it would be about a 36% loss in valuation for commercial property across the state. So it's just not a Johnson County issue, it's a statewide issue. I testified before the Senate Tax Committee a couple of weeks ago and shared this information. There is no legislation, I understand, that's pending this year. But legislatively, they could determine that these theories should not be used to determine market value. Or there's another step that could be taken. If I appraise my property before the Board of Tax Appeals and I don't agree with that decision, then I can go to district court and have a court hearing. If I'm the county, I cannot go to the district court. I must go directly to the appeals court. So really, my appeal has to be based upon information presented at the Board of Tax Appeals. And it's my understanding the Board of Tax Appeals really can make any decision they want to make. It doesn't have to be founded in logic or state law as far as that's concerned. So that's the issue that we're facing, and we think it's a very important issue as to whether or not there is legislation, as I said, that could be enacted. Nothing's going to happen this year. We do have a whole line of other commercial property in Johnson County that will probably be approaching BOTA and attempting to use these same theories. So it's not going to go away unless we get legislation or unless we get an appeals or a Supreme Court decision that this cannot be used. In the state of Michigan, the Michigan Supreme Court turned down the dark store theory, said it's not appropriate. I've offered this to the Senate Tax Committee. I said if using hypothetical theories, conditions, which are not real, then why can't I use one on my residential property? For instance, my wife and I, we have 3 children. We have a 4-bedroom house. The kids are gone. They're married. I've got 3 empty bedrooms. So why shouldn't I be able to take the square footage of those bedrooms and reduce my property value accordingly because they're dark? They're not used. Or my wife and I spend 2 months, January and February, in Arizona where it's warm. So my house is dark 2 months out of the year. Why can't I reduce my property valuation by 1/6 because the house is not used? You know, that sounds kind of dumb, but so do the hypothetical conditions that are being used to value or determine the market value for commercial property. So, hope you stay tuned, and I've spoken with our delegation, and I've spoken before the Senate Tax Committee, raising these same issues, these same concerns, and we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Chairman Eilert. Council, any questions?
Yes.
So how are values of commercial properties determined?
Pardon?
How are the values of commercial properties determined? What's the normal way?
Well, Mr. Welcome can
Okay.
speak to that.
I figured he
but,
would, yeah.
generally, there's different classes of property, A, B, C, and D, let's say. And so A property might be at $20, rents might be at $20 a square foot. D properties rents might be at $5 a square foot. So that's one rating scale that's used, and there's some other data that's used also.
So it's basically whatever the rent per square foot.
Well, that would be part of it, yes, and the location, yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything that we as councils or cities can do to email or meet with or talk to with this endeavor?
Well, just stay in touch with your state delegation members, and most of them that I've talked to understand and don't agree with this approach. Getting something done through the full legislature is the challenge. We do have a couple of cases at the county coming up, appeals. Walmart's involved, and so there are going to be some critical decisions made, perhaps before the end of the year. But depending upon the circumstances of each case, we will probably appeal some of these cases, and if necessary, go to the Kansas Supreme Court to get their decision. So, okay, thank you very much. I think Mr. Welcome wants to share some information about appraisals. I would say this before Paul speaks. I know there's been a lot of questions about the percentage increase of property values, and the calls that I've had come from a lot of retired folks. I'm sure you've had similar calls. I suggested to the Senate Tax Committee the other day that there is something they could do, and that's use a variation of the homestead tax exemption that is on your state income tax. There's a means test. I think it's too low, $19,000 or less, and you can have an exemption. I think it's up to $20,000 or something like that on your property. But to answer the retired community and those on limited incomes, using that approach, I think could work.
Thank you very much. Paul Welcome, County Appraiser. Let's see. Quickly, each of you have a piece of paper that has a map of the Johnson County, and it's color-coded. And what we're seeing is in the northeast part of the county, the values are going up very dramatically. Anything under $350,000 within our county is, the supply and demand is totally out of balance. We have very little supply and a high demand for that particular price range. And so you'll notice that for Prairie Village, you're 16 and 36. Those numbers are just internally for us, but that's actually Prairie Village. But when you go over and you're finding people that want to be in Prairie Village, but now they can't afford that, they're going over to Roland Park, Mission, and Merriam is where we're starting to see a lot of movement as far as valuation increases. We did two Northeast Johnson County chamber events. We did one on Wednesday at 5:30. We did one at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. Now that was a tough one to all of a sudden at the beginning of the week. We've already gone, the chairman has already spoken. I want to try to get you to the things that I was looking at when I made the decision to hire an independent appraiser. If you look over here in 2011, you'll see the median ratio is 98.4. I have to be between 90 and 110 unless they do what they call calculation. It's called bootstrap. Basically, they want to be 95% confident that they can say this is a pinpoint. So when in 2015, my preliminary ratio was in the 80s. And then we had a sale that occurred that was a big box type of store off of Metcalf. And then we hired an independent fee appraiser to tell us what the rents should be. And And so we looked at those rents and then implemented those in 2016. 2016 and 2017, the rents went up dramatically, and they were talking about major increases. But you also got to remember, in 2008 through 2015, we were lowering values because of the economic conditions that we experienced in the recession time period. So they came down and then they came back up. But we implemented that. And these are all the studies that we currently do annually. And you'll notice in 16 and 17, we did what we call the grocery store, big box, and they're highlighted in yellow. Some people say, well, why don't you just, what we call feather the value in? In other words, if it's supposed to go up 100%, we'll take 30% one year, 30% the second, 30% the third. If I did that, then I would be violating these three statutes. Then I have the opportunity to be in the gated community of Leavenworth. I don't like to be there at the gated community of Leavenworth, so I have no choice but to do what I'm responsible to do. I'm going to quickly go through these. Right here. These are the three side by side that you can look at. We're saying, let's say it's $10.50 rents. If you notice that they're saying it's $9, but it's actually, when you do the math on the expenses, it comes down about $6.30 is what they're saying the rent is. And that's also in the last one. Chairman's already spoken to about using the term of 2 to 3 years on the hypothetical lease fee. So the appraiser knows that the lease should be at this, but hypothetically, they're saying it should be down at a much lower. The bottom line, $130 versus $70 versus $57. That is what the issue is before us at BOTA. What's happening in the marketplace, and I'm sorry, sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't as far as these pie charts. The blue is actually residential, and the red is commercial, and the commercial there is about 20%. 23% was personal property. That was before, the year before we went into the reappraisal program in 89. 88 is how the base was actually developed. You notice personal properties at 23, utilities were at 8, commercial was at 20, and for Johnson County, about 47% of the base is in residential. After reclassification, if you're remembering, we reclassified from 30% to 25% on commercial. We moved 12 to 11.5 on residential, i.e., if you had a $100,000 piece of property, the assessed value for commercial was at $30,000. Now it's at $25,000. On residential, it was $100,000. It would be at $12,000 would be assessed value, and $11,500 after the reclassification. But now we're getting over 50% is on residential. You notice commercial's at 30. You notice that personal property went down to 9%. It was 22, but before then we had inventory tax that we could tax. By the Constitution, we eliminated the inventory taxes being eliminated from the base. Public utility values are at 5%. Oops, wrong button. What do I do? Here we are in 17. About 67% of the base is now in residential. 31% is commercial. You notice personal property is down at 1%. Since the 93 to 2017, we did two or three things. One, anything purchased after July 1 of 2006 on FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, computers, those type of things, were then exempt. So that shrunk the personal property coming down. Then in 2014, they passed where the assessed value on boats went from 30% to 15% to 5%. Golf carts are still at 30%. I pay more tax on my golf cart than I do on my boat now, okay? So notice here, personal property now makes up 1% of our base. In 88, it made up over 23%. You notice that residential is 67 and about 31 is the rest in commercial. That's what's happened to the tax base. If we continue, and if they're successful in the dark store, that 31% will probably go to 20%, and the 11% will then all fall under the residential. That's what we're seeing if they're successful in this theory. There was an article on Sunday by the Kansas Chamber, and factually he was very inaccurate. What the theory that we adopt and we use has been approved by the Property Valuation Division since I've been here in '92. I've been here about 27 years valuing here. We've never, ever used hypothetical lease fee or ever used the dark store theory as a valuation method for Johnson County, and as well as for the state of Kansas. So that, he's very inaccurate in that. I will be writing probably a rebuttal for that, so that it can be published on it as well. Statewide, you notice here residential is at 27, 11. This is prior to '89, and 27% was personal property. Oil and gas in the state of Kansas is considered personal property. After reclassification, 37% is residential. Can't read it. 15% is commercial. 18% is personal property. Utilities make up 17%. If you go now, it's roughly 50% is residential, and about 25% is going to be commercial. Utilities, that's your nuclear plant. That's going to be most of the value in the nuclear. Personal property is now down to 4%. The shift has been going on onto the residential. Once you reach about 1.5% of your taxes, your value of your property is paid in taxes. So if you have $100,000, the public seems to accept about $1,500. That's 1.5%. Once you start getting over that 1.5% threshold, you will then see either something like Prop 13, or you're going to see some type of homestead exemption or tax freeze for elderly over 65 on schools. There's other programs that are out there, and you will probably see a strong movement if this continues, in that the residential will continue to be bigger and bigger part of the base that we see. Those are some of the programs. I can answer any questions.
Paul,
Sure.
if I might add one thing. The other thing we did, knowing that if these theories continue, this $100 million loss in revenue, there would be a significant shift to residential property to make that up if the commercial property goes down 30%. And so we went through every school district and a handful of cities, depending upon the city and the school district you're in. Mill levies would have to go up from 11 to 15 mills in order to recover that lost revenue. That's the kind of impact that we're looking potentially on residential property. So it is a big deal. Thank you.
That'll be on top of, they'll find that their escrow account will be short next year already, because you've already been escrowing based upon last year's or the current taxes that you have. So it's a significant issue for us.
I just have a question. You refer to they. Is there a lobbying effort? Is there an organized effort to push this commercial realignment of this percentage? Is it real estate developers? Who is they?
There is a business operation that basically will appeal valuation of the counties throughout the United States. And there's one very active firm, and they have basically most of the big box stores, Walmart, Target, Menards, all the rest of them that are in that group, they have bonded together and trying to force this issue around the United States. It's never been adopted, and it's not, but they're pushing the theory. Why Kansas all of a sudden is starting to adopt it, I don't know why, but it is very frightening because it does not represent market value at all.
Well, who is they? How will we recognize it? Is it a law firm?
It's a law firm. It's a property tax law group.
And its name, the law firm, Property Tax?
Property Tax Law Group is the firm. That seems to be the person that is driving it in Kansas right now. We know that there's a case in Menards that's going through Pottawatomie County that's going to be in front of them on April the 9th. Our Walmart cases are probably going to be somewhere in the third quarter of this year that we will actually be trying that.
Who introduced this into the Kansas legislature?
This is not anything that was introduced in the Kansas legislature. The Board of Tax Appeals is the governing body that we appeal our values to.
The dark store, the
Their
whole,
dark store is in that court case, they represented that we think the least fee, hypothetical least fee, dark store should be the value. We sat there and said, no, it should be based upon the way we've always done it for 27 years. They ruled that it was going to be based upon the hypothetical least fee. That they have the ruling power, and then we only have the right to go to the Court of Appeals, and that's that has to be the Board of County Commissioners' decision to continue on down that path. I have been told, and I've listened to Chairman Eilert enough, that he thinks that we would continue on down that path.
Oh, the Board of Tax Appeals, are those appointed positions?
Yeah, they're a three-member board, and they're appointed by the governor. And the current board is made up of appointees by Governor Brownback.
Okay. Council, any other questions?
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Schaefer, thank you for coming too. Okay, next item is public participation. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the council about an item that is not already currently on the agenda? Please come forward, state your name and address.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. My name is Ben Washburn, and I live at 6711 Rowe Avenue. I'd like to speak for a few minutes regarding the proposed park there at the corner of 67th and Rowe. Due to previous scheduling commitments, I've been unable to attend earlier meetings. In particular, I came here today for two reasons: to commend the city on its historic decision to purchase the property, and then to encourage the city to adopt a visionary approach in developing this property into a park. I'd also like to recognize on the record, on behalf of nearby community members, the generosity of the congregation in choosing to allow this city to develop this property into a park, rather than taking perhaps more other profitable outcomes. Their decision is truly consistent with the family and community values we all hold so dear. I'd also like to thank the city for engaging in this process in a transparent manner. The large park provides a blank canvas for the city to develop not just another park in Johnson County, but to develop a park that sets the standard for regional municipal parks going forward. And there are a few attractions and features that I would encourage the city to consider to incorporate into the overall design. I believe these are features that Prairie Village, as the leading municipality in Johnson County, should integrate into the design to demonstrate its innovative vision and commitment to families that have long been our hallmarks. First, I would like the city to include a water feature, in particular a splash pad. To my knowledge, there are no splash pads at any parks in Prairie Village. While a splash pad may be expensive, they represent the latest trend in municipal parks, and is a feature that will set this park apart from the rest. I encourage Prairie Village not just to install a splash pad, but to establish a new standard for splash pads in the metropolitan Kansas City area. Second, I would like to ask the city to install a children's zip line in this park. I'm aware of one children's zip line at a park in Johnson County at 78th and Flum, quite a distance from 67th and Rowe. Children love zip lines, they're great attractions, and they really help form bonds between parents and children as they throw and catch their children on these zip lines. The third is a need for a large climbing attraction. A large climbing attraction would provide a safe environment for children to work on various skills, increasing strength, dexterity, and hand-eye coordination. To give an idea of the scale, scope, and complexity of this climbing attraction I envision, I refer you to the new attraction that's developed at the newly opened outdoor space at Science City at Union Station. Finally, I encourage the city to plant a wide variety of trees in the park to not only provide shade and picnic opportunities, but educational opportunities for our children. I encourage the city to take this unique opportunity we have to build a park that will leave other municipalities envious of the vision and commitment to community displayed by Prairie Village leadership. This park should not include just the basic check-the-box type of park amenities. This park should include unique attractions built on a grand scale that will inspire children for years to come. I recognize and am thankful for the sizable financial commitment the city has made to its residents by purchasing this property and proposing a park. The responsible fiscal policies that have enabled our city to achieve unparalleled success in the region are matched only by our commitment to community and family values. While including such amenities as I've described will no doubt be more expensive than simple slides and swings, they are a wise investment that will showcase Prairie Village across the region, bring additional business to the nearby shops, and encourage our community to come together as friends and families to build new relationships and lifelong friendships. We get one chance to do this, so let's do it right. Thank you.
Thank you for your ideas, Mr. Washburn. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, next item is consent agenda. Anything to be removed for further discussion?
I would like to remove number 3.
Okay, go ahead.
Number 3, excuse me. Number 3 is are the revisions to Ordinance 1-804. And I think all of the revisions that have been proposed are generally consistent with what we discussed at last meeting and the last couple meetings of bringing this ordinance, making it clearer in the context of the new single meeting structure. But there's one substantive addition to the very end that I would like to move to remove, and that's at the addition on the very last sentence that changes the sentence, which is currently, the committee shall also serve as the final appeal board on employee grievances, and it changes it to the committee shall also serve as a final appeal board on employee grievances for employees who report directly to the city administrator. The way I read that, that would greatly reduce the number of employees that this would apply to. Because obviously I think most don't report directly to you. Is that right?
So the way we set this up before in our employee handbook, that all employee appeals go to the assistant city attorney, and only employees that would report directly to me, that would be Keith, Chief, those are basically all appointed positions. This governing body would hear those appeals if there was a disciplinary or a termination made. This body used to hear employee appeals, and there were some that became a little problematic, and it was decided that that appeal body should change due to litigation purposes in part. And so there is a very structured appeal process. All employees' appeal rights, final say is the assistant city attorney, and then for this body it would be appointed officials.
So, what's in the handbook? You referenced the handbook.
Our employee handbook, it deals with employee rights for grievances and appeals. And so depending on where they're at in the organization, if an appeal to appeal beyond the city administrator, it would then go to the assistant city attorney.
I think that, what you're saying, I think makes sense. And here's my procedural issue with this, is that this is a sort of a substantive policy-oriented change that I think we ought to run separately from what we're doing here to just make this more clear about when we have meetings.
I think it could be actually removed since it's already approved this way in the handbook. This was just a cleanup item to make it in check with that, but I don't believe that it's necessary.
Ms. Logan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that along with what Wes said, if it's in the handbook, it's probably not something we have to amend this for.
No, I agree. I agree with you.
So that's my motion, is to approve the proposed revisions, except the revisions to the last sentence, or the addition to the last sentence. the change. My motion is to approve the revisions as proposed, except the addition to the last sentence.
I would second that.
Ed?
Going to vote on this?
Just on 3. We'll
Are
just
you
vote
just going to vote
separately on number 3.
number 3?
Yeah, we'll just vote
separately?
separately on that one.
Suggesting that the last sentence be deleted or some portion of the last?
Last change.
Just the change.
So you would then hear all appeal rights?
What I,
Well, and my concern, two concerns. Number one is that the purpose of this ordinance on the consent agenda today last meeting, this change was not discussed by council or committee of the whole last meeting, and so I don't think it's an appropriate addition to this motion. That's number one. Parts to this also is if that must be made,
Handbook was approved by the governing body. This was simply a cleanup item.
and that's what I thought. Number two is if the handbook was approved by council, then adding this may be a cleanup, but it confuses the issue because it implies that there was some conflict between the handbook and the ordinance, which it doesn't sound like there was, since the handbook was approved separately.
There's some confusion here. So the policy has not changed at all. So this is not trying to change the policy at all.
And I
Okay.
understand that.
So it was written in a confusing way, and so they were trying to change that. So instead of changing it, they can just delete it. That would be the appropriate recommendation, is that that last sentence would be deleted
Because it's covered by the
because it's already
policy.
covered in the handbook. Is that okay? We're not changing, we'd just be deleting it so that there's no more confusion.
all of this, I think, makes sense. I would just like to run this separately, maybe at the next council meeting, because it sounds like this is not a burning issue. I mean, we're not having people, we're not doing appeals as it is. So that's my motion. We can vote it down or up. The change is in the last sentence, and it's in our packet on page 48.
Well, I gather from Wes's comment that the last phrase there, for employees who report directly, which was added since the last meeting, was to make it consistent with the personnel policy now. If you passed it without that phrase, then it would be your ordinance would be inconsistent with your policy. So would it make more sense to just delete the final sentence altogether?
I believe so.
That's what. Why don't we vote on my motion, and then if we vote it down, then.
Can you state your motion, please?
My motion is to approve the proposed revisions to ordinance 1-804 with the exception of the addition to the last sentence in subsection D.
Chad?
Quick question. The current personnel manual has policies so that all non-direct reporting appeals go to the Assistant City Attorney, and all direct people who report to you on appeal go to the council. Thank you.
Okay, council ready to vote? All those in favor? Yes, Ron, give a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay, let's do a show of hands for aye, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Opposed? 6. I will vote opposed. All right, Mr. Herring.
I'm assuming the item is still on the floor.
Yes.
Approval of the ordinance with the last sentence of item D deleted.
Second.
Any discussion on that? All those in favor, please raise your hand.
I'm assuming, essentially, I'm amending this document. Still will have to be approved at the consent agenda. We're not voting to approve the ordinance yet.
Question, sorry. To clarify, Chad, you're simply saying
I'm
remove the
sorry.
last
I'm
sentence?
simply moving to amend the document to remove the last sentence of item D.
Okay, raise your hand again, please, for aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. All right, so I will now accept a motion for approval of the consent agenda for 1 and 2. No second is required. Do we need to do, I thought we just voted on 3.
3 as amended.
Okay, sorry. So we will do 1, 2, and then 3 is amended. All right. Clerk will please call the roll.
Aye.
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 Mr. Nelson.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Carries. Thank you very much.
Mayor?
Moving on to, yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I know you want to move on. I want to say at this point that there's part of the comment that I really agree with that I might offer recommendation for in the future. When there are changes to items before us, particularly in the consent agenda, that are not directly germane to the previous conversation, it would be helpful to treat those as a separate item and to have some explanation for that additional change. I think that's what caused some of this confusion, and would have helped us to have some conversation about that specifically beforehand so we could have addressed those more directly. Thank you.
All right, under Planning Commission, I don't see Mr. Brewster here. Oh, you're filling in, Jamie? Perfect. Okay, so consider approval of a request for rezoning at 7540 Reinhardt Street.
So I did confirm that Chris would be here tonight, but what I failed to do is tell him that our meeting now starts at 6 instead of 7:30. So that's completely my fault, and I apologize that he's not here, but I
But
do
you've had
think-
45 minutes to prepare.
Yeah, so I'll just keep you guys occupied for 45 minutes till he gets here. No, I think I can give you a quick overview of what the Planning Commission recommended, and I do believe the applicant is here, and hopefully I can answer any questions that you have about the application. The current lot's at 7540 Reinhardt Street. It's currently zoned R1A, and the applicant is requesting to rezone the property to R1B with the intention to split the lots into 2 lots and build 2 homes on those lots. The Planning Commission, so the current lot is 17,690 square feet. After, if a rezone were to be approved and then the lots to be split, they would be about 8,800 square feet. The Planning Commission did hear this item at their March meeting. A public hearing was held. There was nobody present to speak in favor or against the application. City staff did recommend approval on this item, and the reason being is that if you look at the overall area as a whole, there are a lot of non-conforming uses. And so what that means is basically when the zoning regulations were approved, a lot of these lots had already been platted. So when the zoning regulations went into place, none of these a lot of these lots don't meet the actual requirements in the zoning regulations. So there is a map in your staff report that shows the number of non-conforming lots in this particular area. It's the one with the red dots on it. And so when looking at that, we thought there was a broader policy question of, is this whole area zoned appropriately? So while we would not normally recommend spot rezoning and just rezoning one lot, we do think there's a greater policy issue that the Planning Commission and City Council needs to examine as to whether that whole area is zoned appropriately as R1A, or maybe it should be R1B anyway. So as we look at updating our comprehensive plan, that's a discussion we're hoping to have. So that was the reason for the recommendation. So the Planning Commission, in examining all 8 golden factors, did find that this rezoning request met those factors, and they recommended approval unanimously. So the council has a couple options. You can adopt the recommendation of the Planning Commission. That just requires a simple majority, 7 votes of the governing body. You can override the recommendation of the Planning Commission, but that would require a 2/3 majority vote of the governing body, or 9 votes. Or you can return the recommendation of the Planning Commission with a statement specifying the basis for the governing body's failure to approve or disapprove by a simple majority. So with that, I can answer any questions, or we can let the applicant come up and speak.
Ed?
I went over and looked at it and looked at the plans, and I do believe that the developer's done a good job who's trying to build a house and look at this. So with that being said, I'd like to make a motion for approval of PC 2018-03 as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Second.
Any idea how many more lots are like this in Prairie Village?
How many lots in this area, or how many lots in general?
How many lots in Prairie Village would be subject to this sort of lot split?
I do not know that off the top of my head. I would guess there are quite a few. What could happen at this lot right now is it's 17,000 square feet. It would yield about a 9,000 square foot lot. If it was just a little bit bigger, the developer wouldn't need a rezoning, could do a lot split and get administrative approval and build the 2 houses anyway.
All right.
Or they could build a very large lot on the lot as it is, since it's currently zoned, or a very large house on the lot since
Thank
it's
you.
zoned R1A.
Chad?
What's the timeline on the work for the Planning Commission to do this comprehensive review of zoning issues in this area?
Wonderful question. We're giving a presentation to them tomorrow night, making a recommendation on how we would like to move forward for comprehensive plan updates. We're hoping to get ultimately a recommendation from them that they want to pass on to the governing body. So I don't have a very clear answer yet, but I think city staff would like to move forward with comprehensive plan updates as soon as possible.
I just want to say that I'm concerned with doing this before that plan, particularly if it's coming up pretty soon. I'm worried about the way that this decision might impact the decisions of the Planning Commission one way or the other, if they feel like they've already decided that lot splits into smaller 1B or 1B is the way they want to go. Was there any discussion among the Planning Commission folks about the way this recommendation might set precedent for how they deal with other irregular or grandfathered properties related to their plans?
There was. They actually, a lot of them specifically stated before they voted that this vote was specifically to the factors of this particular case, and in no way would set precedent for future rezoning scenarios. The way they were looking at this is the current house on the lot doesn't even meet our setback requirements. If you've driven by it, it's right on the lot line. It is in need of redevelopment. And so I think between that and the fact that the neighborhood seemed to be in support of it, those were the factors that led them to vote in favor. But they did, on the public record, say that this was a very unique circumstance and wouldn't be setting precedent for their decisions moving forward.
So you were talking about the zoning in the area. What is the lot size for R1A?
10,000 square feet or above.
So all but one house on this street, this neighborhood, fits the R1A?
On this street, yes. There's one, but except the lot right next to the existing lot is a non-conforming lot. But all of the other ones do meet the R1A requirements. That's correct. When we looked at it, and that's one of the things that Chris pointed out in his staff report, is that is of concern, and we mentioned that to the Planning Commission. But when we're looking at it from an overall land use perspective, there are a number of non-conforming lots in the overall neighborhood.
Well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, neighborhood is the street in which you live in relation to your neighbors. So when you're talking about splitting a home or splitting a lot, and looking at the other 20 houses on the lot on that street, this would be the smallest lot on the street. And I'm struggling with the character of the neighborhood, as the Golden Factor #1 states, in order to rezone the character of the neighborhood. So I have gone and looked at it. I've looked at it online through the appraiser's office, and I'm struggling with how a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house that's there now, what that's going to do and how that will affect the neighbors around them to build 4 bedrooms, 3.5 bath, 2 of them houses. The house there that's now is 1,023 square feet, and what's proposed is 2,500 square feet. So you're going from 1,000 to over 5,000 square feet of density there. So I'm struggling with how that would be considered in character with the neighborhood. And they're completely surrounded by R1A homes. So that would go to the zoning and uses #2 of the Golden Factor, zoning and uses of property nearby.
Terrence?
I too have driven past there, and professionally, I think the solution that's been presented is works with the neighborhood. I think they've done every means to try to accommodate the neighborhood feel. I actually will call back to a comment Mr. Welcome made when he's gone through and discussed the reason why taxes are going up, appraisals are going up, is because there's not a demand, there's a higher demand for homes in Prairie Village that are smaller in nature like this, and that's why our appraisals are going up. One of the reasons. This provides an opportunity for someone in Prairie Village to purchase a smaller home. And I would just like to say that I have received 4 emails from residents on that street, all supporting this.
Ed?
I agree with what Terrence said. This street is pretty unique in Prairie Village. I know there's a lot of wards that have a lot of redevelopment and stuff taking place. Not a lot of it has happened in Ward 6. Personally, I welcome it. I think it's great to bring a new house into it, start to redevelop that street and clean some stuff up. I think the developer's done an outstanding job on what we have to work with in that. In fact, if he's here, maybe he can present, and if you guys would like to hear, I think it's worthwhile. Until you spend some time and really understand what's taking place in that neighborhood, it's hard to make judgment that it's going to set precedent for other parts of the city. It is a unique area, and I think they've done a good job.
I see John Moffett in the audience. John, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Mayor and council members, and I appreciate Councilmember Gallagher's comments, being in the industry, that he would be so complimentary of what we're attempting to do. And we are actively involved in redevelopment in Prairie Village currently. A little background, I've done this my whole life, about 40 years. This property is very unique, and I assure you the Planning Commission did spend a lot of time debating the president of this. But if you go look at what is there, we are simply proposing removing that house and replacing it with something. I've got a rendering here that the Chairman Wasserman was very supportive of. I've met the neighbor next door immediately to the south at least 3 or 4 times. He'd like to see a young family move in the neighborhood. So I think back to both the ward council members' comments about the changing of the neighborhood and the fact south of 75th Street has not enjoyed the development north of 75th Street. This might actually be a precedent in a positive manner, starting to fuel and ignite some future development in that area, which it certainly needs. This particular house, I believe, was built in the early 30s. So this was one of the first, this was the original plat. And as we discussed earlier, the property immediately adjacent to the north is non-conforming. And let's be clear, that zoning classification was created, I think, if I remember right, Mr. Jordan, probably about 20 years ago when we came in and kind of hired a firm to do a broad brush to designate areas because there was no zoning that existed. So they kind of broad brushed and said, okay, we're going to call this R1A. But if you go to the street immediately to the east, everything on that street, I believe, is non-conforming to the R1A designation. So when we refer to that designation, that was a broad brush that at the time was appropriate, and now, as we can see, the Planning Commission is readdressing it because it doesn't apply anymore. So as we look at saying it is an R1A classification, that was never classified R1A as an original planning as we would know it today, for example, what you did at Meadowbrook. So that being said, I think 4 emails from neighbors. I think we need to be supportive of what the neighbors want, and they certainly have seen this, and we've held the appropriate hearings. So let's give the neighborhood what it would like. If anybody would like to see these drawings, I'd be happy to share them with you.
How much are these going to retail for?
Well, that's a great question. If Canadian tariffs continue to rise and we continue to face a massive labor shortage, these will probably be in excess of $600,000. Our original intention was to bring them in under $500,000. Our construction costs in the last 18 months are probably up 30%. Hard costs, 30%. If all of the Parade of Homes will start in 2 weeks. If any of you go on the Parade of Homes and you look at a house, Summit Building is one of the biggest builders in Kansas City. If you look at the 2-story plan they've been building in Longview, 4 years ago that house was $369,000. It'll be in the Parade book at $500 now. Same house.
Is there something so unique about that property that I don't hear anyone opposing building on it? I think what I hear is people opposing necessarily splitting it. And is there something so unique about it that it must be split, or could a single house be built on it? From a pure just zoning standpoint right now.
Yes.
Okay.
And just if I can add to that, yes, and I think what Mr. Moffett could do is build a 1.5 million very large house on that property, which would not fit the character of the neighborhood. That's what he could do. So what he's trying to do is to do 2 smaller houses that would actually fit the character of the neighborhood. So I think what he's doing is better in the long run for that area than building a gigantic house that would definitely look out of place.
Assuming that a $1.5 million house would sell there.
But he's entitled to do that, is my point, the way it's currently zoned.
I understand. Okay, and my understanding from Mr. Welcome earlier was people were moving toward Berlin Park because the entry-level price, if I understood him correctly, was something like $350,000. And what you're saying is the house would probably be in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $600,000.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Tucker?
I'll just say I lived right next door at 7534 Reinhardt. My wife and I lived there for about 4 years. My concern with this is not with splitting that lot. I know that lot very well. Is not necessarily splitting the lot, although I share Chad's concerns in that regard. In terms of the timing, it's the houses. I struggle seeing how it would fit with the character of that block, having these size houses on the smallest lots on the block. Because this is we're talking about at least one of them is a 2-story house, and the square footage is pretty large for that block and that lot. So that's my concern.
All right, council, we've got a motion and a second on the floor. We're going to do a show of hands. This is roll call? Okay. Okay. All right.
Mr. Herring?
No.
No?
Yes.
Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
No.
Mrs. Myers?
Aye.
Mrs. Moorhead?
Aye.
Mr. Runyon?
No.
Mrs. McFadden? Aye. Mr. O'Dowd? Aye. Mr. Gallagher? Aye. Mayor Rossman?
Aye. Motion carries. Next, consider approval of an ordinance for special use permit renewal for Queen of Paws.
Yes, so this is a renewal of an existing special use permit that was approved by the governing body back in 2016. The applicant is for Queen of Paws at 8827 Rowe Avenue. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on this item back at their March meeting. There was one person who came to speak in favor of the application and nobody present to speak against the application. And the Planning Commission did recommend approval unanimously of this application. And I believe it would renew it for 5 years, subject to the conditions laid out in your staff report. And the Queen of Paws has had no code violations or anything since its special use permit was granted back in 2016.
I would move to,
Go ahead, Tucker.
I would move to approve the ordinance for special use permit renewal for Queen of Paws.
Second.
Motion is second, any discussion?
And my recollection of the discussion at the Planning Commission was that the one person who came and spoke in favor previously came and spoke against.
That's correct, yes.
At the last time.
Aye.
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 Motion carries. Thank you very much. Moving on to Mayor's Report. You will notice that there are all these fun little tips in front of you. Handbook for newly elected office holders. If you look at the date, April of 2000. This is from a booklet that I actually received earlier in my career from Mid-America Regional Council, and we felt like at least these portions of that booklet were still very much up to date and handy. And then we've also got this other one, Top Tips for Successful Public Service, that we thought were helpful. We initially were pulling these out for our newer council members, and then we thought, oh heck, we might as well just give them to everybody because we thought they were pretty good. So for most of you, probably just some good reminders, but maybe a few things that you've forgotten. So anyway, just wanted to point that out. Wanted to let you know a couple of things that I've been involved in. Both the chief and I got invited to participate as Celebrity Meals on Wheels volunteers in Prairie Village a while back, which was really an amazing experience. Very, very awesome, great experience. Was very glad to be able to do that. People were very surprised to see the mayor show up at their door, I've got to say. So it was really fun to have a conversation with folks. Attended the Overland Park Mayor's Breakfast, went to the Johnson County State of the County Address with many of you. Thank you also for coming. Attended the Kansas City State of the City Address with Mayor Sly James. Those were really the big items that I was involved in. And I think that's all I have. So we'll move on to staff reports. Chief?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. Good reminder on the Meals on Wheels. Just a real quick story. The volunteer that I rode with, his name is Max DeWeese. And Max is a 97-year-old World War II Marine veteran. And I got to spend about 2.5 hours with Max. Certainly the highlight of my year, spending time with him and the things that he described to me. Left a big impression on me, in as much as that Max is actually coming tomorrow to speak to our staff about his experience and leadership in World War II. Just a fascinating story. If you get a chance, he does a brief documentary. It's called, it's on patriotfeatures.org. and his name is Max DeWeese, but it tells his story. He was one of the, he landed on Guadalcanal in World War II, and some of the things he describes is just, really brings home what veterans did for all of us. So anyways, it was a great morning, certainly left an impression on me. A couple other items. I think a while back, Captain Roberson may have introduced this Village Video Cooperative that we're doing, where we're actually trying to get people that have surveillance video that's pointed toward the street. Does that ring a bell? Just wanted to kind of bring that back, and so far it's looking pretty good. We have about 18 residents in Prairie Village that have signed up through this program, so I think that's kind of starting to catch on, so that's a good thing. And lastly, we have an upcoming Coffee with the Cop event. It's going to be over at Panera on the 13th, Friday the 13th, from 7 to 9. Please come.
Update on 68th and Mission as far as the
I'm sorry, Serena?
What was his last name? The Max?
DeWeese, DeWeese.
Okay. And then I want to make a comment, just because I had a resident contact me on the, I personally think the program with the cameras are wonderful, but I have had one resident that is concerned on what we're going to use it for and so forth. So I think when he brings it back, I think that might be something that when I see it on the agenda, I'll send. But just concerning how we're going to use those snippets of video. And it was in the Village Voice, I guess. So I would.
I mean, I can real quickly. It's not real time. So if we have a map, so if there's a crime that occurs and we know that somebody may have a system, we will contact them and ask them to review. If they've seen anything, then we'll send a detective out. It just helps our detectives instead of doing a canvas. But if we get information, we certainly could use it as evidence. But I can talk more with you offline or...
No, I understand. I just, when he comes back to bring it forth again, I think it's what you said, is just be prepared that I've had a couple of residents, definitely one, I think included another council member on their concerns, was it you? About how can you access this, what is the rights, even though, I mean, what is the process? And I think just for clarity's sake, was it the Shawnee Mission Post, I guess, that you said? It's all about transparency, and when they read the article, how they interpreted it was, what are the police department, what else are they going to use? So I just want to make sure that our residents understand this is something volunteer, and we want to use it. Maybe it wasn't portrayed as though we're talking about it today, and I just want our residents to understand this is for if it's needed, and that residents can sign up for it personally to assist in your needs.
And my understanding of part of the concern was that we were asking to compile and conglomerate the video feeds rather than that they were in a voluntary request if there was some violation in the area.
Okay, yeah. No, I hadn't heard that. I didn't realize there was that impression that it was.
The difference might be, I think Kansas City, Missouri may be gathering all of the videotape and storing it. Is that correct? Maybe there's the difference in that I believe you're only asking for it if it's needed.
Correct.
And my understanding was that maybe Kansas City, Missouri was automatically getting that video.
Yeah, I don't know. There are probably some organizations that have the capability for live feed, but that is not what we're doing.
I think part of the concern is the increasing growth of video just around the world, around the country, and with the traffic cameras, and then just the expansion of having cameras everywhere. But I know some residents are concerned about that and are fearful of that growth.
Okay. Jory?
Well, I'd like to say a positive about the camera because I had a strange experience last weekend, and I do have video cameras around my house, and someone came to my door and presented themselves as something that they were not. And so I had filed a police report, and again, your department did a fabulous job. But I had a picture of the person and shared that, and we ended up being able to find the person again, even after he was told he wasn't following our protocol and not having our permits, because we had a visual of there's only so many eyes that we have on the street with our police officers. And so I can totally see how important this would be to aid in solving crimes and issues going on in our neighborhoods, because there's a lot of miles of street and a lot of homes, and I, for one, am very thankful that I had the camera and was able to share that. So I will be signing up.
Right. Keith?
A quick update on 68th and Mission, the Brush Creek. Don Baker, I talked with him today. We're looking at getting some concepts on how to eliminate road flooding and home flooding here later this month, so we'll have some updates on that soon. We do expect finally to have the bike ped plan back to council at the next meeting on the 16th, so we'll have a discussion related to that. Discussion related to the bike ped meeting at the next meeting, so. Yes?
So what's going to happen now with the signs now that we can use the lighted pedestrian crosswalk system?
Well, I think the biggest issue with that, and it's the same issue we've had in the past when they were still allowed to be installed, is where can we install them and where we should not install them. We do have a little pedestrian crossing guide that references locations that they shouldn't be used, and I may just send out to everybody, since I've kind of been talking about pedestrian issues with everybody, to kind of see what the guidance is that we have. You know, it's dependent upon the volume of the street, the widths of the street, the amounts of pedestrians, and not a lot of locations actually meet our requirements. So what we need to do now is look at if there's any other opportunities that we want to install them that would generally meet the criteria that council would want to support. So I'll be bringing back some more information on that.
Just wanted to update everyone on the exterior grant program. We have approved 23 individuals to receive the grant this year. Currently, we have nobody on the wait list. We will accept we will accept people to be on the wait list, but we're not sure we'll be able to award any other grants, and we've already had 4 turn in for reimbursement through the end of March. Also, we got Republic to agree to pay for the cost of sending out postcards to remind our residents of large item pickup, which is taking place on April 14th and April 21st. April 14th will be north of 75th Street and along 75th Street, and April 21st will be along 75th Street and south of 75th Street. So postcards will be going out to all of our residents, probably middle of next week is when they'll receive them.
Keith, I was just going to say, great job on the streets this week. I have the unfortunate job of working in trucking sometimes, and the roads that you have to travel on to get to and from. I'm so proud to live in a city that when you wake up and need to get from place to place, that the roads are cleared, and you guys did an amazing job this weekend.
You're here.
I don't want to call on you, Katie. Go ahead.
Well, I have some personal.
Speak into your microphone, please.
Not on? Okay. I have some personal information to share with you. With very mixed emotions and after a lot of thought, I am going to retire from the practice of law. I'm in senior counsel status now with my firm, which means that I'm really just going to work on special projects going forward. And what that means for you all is that I will not be working on Prairie Village matters on a regular basis. I'll be finishing up projects, but going forward, I I just won't be because that's part of what retirement is all about. And obviously, I think it's been 10 years. It was in 2018. I just don't remember the exact month, and I've enjoyed it very much. But I'm at the age, and my husband's at the age where it's time for us to move on and do other things. So.
Well, Katie, we wish you well. We are certainly going to have a little going away celebration for you in the near future. You will be missed, but you have promised me you'll come back if we
yes,
need
as a matter
you.
of fact, I will be here at a meeting in May. I know David's, filling in for me some, but he'll be out of town, so I'll be here in May for a meeting.
So to that point, Council, I will be at the next council meeting bringing forward a recommendation that David Waters would be our new city attorney. David is uniquely qualified in that he has been subbing for Katie, so he's already very familiar with Prairie Village, and as you know, he's been helping quite a bit with the cell tower issues. He also lives in the Northeast area, very familiar with Prairie Village. He serves on the board of the Northeast Chamber. He is on the Westwood City Council, and he's also served on the Planning Commission. So he definitely has a very broad breadth of experience when it comes to municipal issues, and that on top of him being a very good, solid attorney, I can't imagine anybody else who would be a better fit for this particular position at this particular time. So I have talked with David. He is very interested in accepting that position. We've also talked about how we can move forward and reduce our legal fees. So he's got some ideas on that. That might mean he is not at every council meeting. That might mean he's not sitting through the entire council meeting. And he's also got some other ideas. So he was very positive about working with us on that, which I think also makes him a good candidate. He's very aware of the pressures that we have on us from a budget standpoint. So look forward to that. And again, Katie, thank you so much for all the time and effort. You've been so responsive and so good to work with. We're really going to miss you. Wes.
I happen to know a good band if you want one, because I got to watch Katie's husband, David. They have a band called Sneakers, so I'll plug them. So tell them I plugged them. So actually, they're quite good. We enjoyed them at a fundraiser. So anyway. Also, in your packet is the April Plan of Action. I'd be happy to talk about any item that you would like to talk about. Hi, Chris.
Good news, Chris. You can go home now.
Okay.
Some April Fools.
I wasn't joking. My text. But I'd be happy to answer anything that is on the April Plan of Action that you have any questions about. Also, April 16th, we've been trying to really program and plan our council meetings out. This one appears to be quite large, so we can't help the timing on some of these items, so please let me know if you're not going to be here. But some of the highlights coming in, and this is subject to change, but just to kind of give you a heads up of what's coming at the next meeting, we think he's going to be coming in with CAR's 5-year program, potentially. He's already talked about the bike pedestrian plan. Parks programming agreement consideration with Johnson County Park and Rec is coming in. This was vetted by Park and Rec Committee. Also, the Santa Fe Trail Kansas Historical Society is coming in. And discussion about for-profit programming in Prairie Village parks. This has come up. The mayor and I has talked about it. We talked about it with Park and Rec. She would like further discussion with the city council. And the main thing about this is I'm uncomfortable making a decision about this when we have somebody for profit taking a park at a very reduced rate and making money on public property. And so basically what I want is direction from the council about or further discussion about what is occurring in the parks, or maybe it's renting our community center and then they are basically, it's a sublease, if you will. They're charging for activities potentially on our property or in our structures. And so I think it's a good time to have a conversation about it and get some direction. We may not need to make a decision, but we do have some pending applications.
Right.
As far as programming completely separate than Johnson County programming.
So this would be like, I have a professional soccer club. Your child wants to attend, and I'm charging you $500 for your child to attend my soccer camp. And by the way, my soccer camp is at Porter Park. And so that's kind of an exaggeration, but there's the potential that there are teams or sporting events that are above and beyond what we're used to, that are out there and want to use our property for profit. Right. We have partnered with another entity in the past, and it was but it was a very low cost, and that person was paying Prairie Village a percentage of the class. But it's a one-time deal, and it wasn't very much money. But we do need to have this discussion because it's becoming more relevant.
So when bringing that back, will you also include some of the ideas, maybe in reference to Johnson County, if they were to use our parks for the programming on soccer camps? Will you include that also?
That discussion. And I know that they're prepared to make a presentation. We're a little bit late in the year, but it's just how it's worked out.
Right, but I think if we're looking at like a soccer camp with 500, if you're looking at Johnson County Parks doing programming in that park and what the cost would be, I think from an idea standpoint with full apples to apples, some idea.
And just so you know, they're not for profit. They're just recovering their costs, and so that's what they're going to talk about.
On the ones that are for profit, have we checked to see if our insurance covers us? The edge of, whatever immunity we may have in terms of a traditional governmental activity, and if we start engaging in things that are moving more towards profit, that would want to make sure that our insurance coverage doesn't exclude that, or maybe even affirmatively covers it before we go down that path.
Just to add to that, there is an extremely broad recreational use exception for public entities under the Kansas Tort Claims Act. So generally, if someone's injured in a park for any reason, the cities aren't liable in Kansas.
Okay. I guess my question is,
Very,
have
very
we checked?
broad. It's a very, very broad exclusion. I mean,
Can I just say one more thing? Speaking of insurance, there are also some waivers and insurance clauses that are in place. To answer your question, Mr. Runyon, like bounce houses and things like that, but I'll do a little bit of double checking. So our renewals for insurance are coming back at the next meeting as well, because they're also due in May, and so those will be coming back. We tried to get them back tonight, but by the time we went through our complete inventories of equipment, and secondly, they rebid our work comp. It was a good time to do it because we had a very good rating last year, and so those items will be hopefully completed and brought back at the next meeting.
Change of subject, Wes. Do we have any ETA on when the CFD #2 is going to be turning ground over here for the fire station?
Permitting, did you say for the permitting?
Groundbreaking.
Groundbreaking.
Well, we've already done the groundbreaking, but when are they
Well,
actually going to be turning dirt?
Had the fire department make application. They're really close, I know that, so.
Probably waiting for spring to get here.
Ground's frozen.
Okay, moving on to old business. Any old business to come before the council? Seeing none. Any new business? Oh, sorry, Ted, is it old business? Okay.
Real quick, and I don't want to burden your staff too much, Wes, but, you know, over the years, and the new council members may not know this, but, you know, since I've been on council, we've really pushed the property maintenance, and it'd be nice to get kind of an update on how we're going around and what we're looking at as far as maintenance and looking at the different neighborhoods. And the reason I bring that up now is we just talked about, you know, Reinhardt and some of the houses being built. I mean, there are a lot of areas in Ward 6 and stuff that need attention and need people to start doing things like Mr. Moffett was looking at earlier. And so, again, they all go hand in hand as far as property values, as far as property maintenance, as far as rentals, all the parts and pieces that come together. So, trying to
Bill,
fit it in
You
later,
you
so-
missed it.
so-
We had it. Unfortunately, it was during a meeting.
Was
that-
it? Okay.
That
Then I
you weren't able to
apologize.
attend. Jamie did a phenomenal
Okay.
job, and
Okay.
she has a great presentation that she can
Then
share
I,
with you.
then I
Yeah,
apologize.
that's okay.
I just, you know, again, as spring comes in, it's something that's always comes up every year. So, anyway.
Thank you. New business, Serena.
So I have a question first. The protocol for when council members receive mail, what is the process? When a council member receives mail here, I want to know what the process is.
Mail here.
Here at City Hall.
Okay.
So a letter comes in with my name or Courtney's name on it. What is the process from when it gets here to? Okay. Okay, so the process, if it is a stamped first class, then is to scan and to send it to us? Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other new business? All right. I would suggest that before we move into Council Committee of the Whole, we go ahead and take a break, since it is 7:30. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and then when we come back, I will accept a motion to move into the Council Committee of the Whole. All right? Thank you.
We went down to, a friend of ours calls it the Krusty Krab. It's actually called Club Krokstrom. It's at 36th and Broadway. It's Norwegian food. It's really good. Uptown, Midtown. Uptown Theater? Oh, yeah. That's right. Is sort of.
It's right there, is that Broadway?
Yeah, that's Broadway, and the restaurant is essentially north and east of it about a block. It's a sort of weird European, German-style looking building. But it's in there. It used to be a jazz club, but they have really good breakfast. They have very good food, period. And then we went home. We did.
Grand Street last year, because they had a big buffet.
Yeah. We wound up, we came out and did like literally nothing. Weather was crappy, and Shelley was, she's convinced that I don't know how to relax. And I said, no, I do. I like being busy. And she's like, what are you going to do when you retire? I said,
That's the way it feels. Like, we went to 11 o'clock service. Elise just place and sit back there and relax. Now I relax. It's like, thanks.
she's like, you
got
don't.
stuff to do.
No, she said you don't know how to sit still. And I'm like, I have my moments. I find yard work very relaxing because it doesn't involve talking to anyone or
Yeah, I do too.
responding to clients and I took yesterday. It's the first time in a long time. I may start doing this more. I literally did not look at my electronic devices the entire day. And I got to work this morning and I was like, kind of.
I'm trying to do that too, because my work never stops.
Yeah.
Like, I get emails all night, and that phone,
Yeah.
just have to set stuff aside.
Yeah.
Just to clear my head.
And the problem with it is if I discovered that if you respond to clients, then you create the expectation. Not, gee, that was nice of Dan to email me at 9:30 at night. It's now you've created an expectation.
My worst thing, I get an hour unhappy about 2 hours. It's just crazy. I mean, it's just through.
Well, and practice of law, by and large, has turned into McDonald's drive-through. It's like that. And I'm like,
Anybody wants to answer, just.
yeah, and I'm like, that is particularly not true in dealing with the IRS. And people are like, what do you mean it could be 6 months to a year and a half? I'm like, I would be cartwheels if something worked out in 6 months. Just like, it's not like they take your stuff and work exclusively on it for, till it's done. So yeah, it's hard to explain to clients to go, yeah, this is probably going to be a year to a year and a half.
They just look at it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you get I'll just go somewhere else. Fine, go somewhere else.
When you start putting inflation on your count. Yes, it does. If you all be in this in 2 years. Amazing.
Did you go to Michigan?
Yes.
I'm a quasi Michigan fan. I lived in Traverse City.
Don't make me stick my tongue out. Okay, Dan, do it fast, whatever you're doing. Yeah, Dan. Good deal. Hey, come on, Dan.
Is there money? I think I have a couple quarters in my purse.
I could ask for a motion first.
Oh, heck yes. Turn him on.
Council, I will accept a motion to go into the Council Committee of the Whole meeting. So moved. Motion by Brooke and Jory second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, Dan.
So we are officially in the Council Committee of the Whole. Before we start, I note it says it's ordinarily presided over by the Council President, so there must be exceptions.
I wasn't sure about that either.
Or timely, perhaps. Okay. Keith, I think you have our single item. Blessedly, we're not watching the Final Four tonight, I guess.
discuss the possibility of adding an FTE to the Public Works Department. Kind of talked about this on 2 occasions with council. Once when we approved the contract for the current contract stormwater engineer that we have. I think Council Member Odell even mentioned the possibilities if we were considering looking at a permanent resource into the future. I think we're at that point where we see the need that we can have that now and into the future. It's a big issue adding staff. We're a small city, so we realize that we have to be very careful doing that. We can't just meet the need today, but we also have to meet the need into the future. I think the memo did a pretty good job of walking through what we're trying to accomplish, what we're doing. I'll touch on a few highlights. Obviously, we have a very large drainage system in Prairie Village, underground, above ground, runs in and around the houses all through our city. Infrastructure replacement and reconstruction of a lot of that is going to have to happen in the future. Working on projects in and around houses and in backyards is tremendously time consuming on the front end, during construction, and even after construction. Our stormwater, all of our stormwater items currently are funded using the stormwater utility fee that was approved by council in 2009. Currently, that generates about $1.6 million a year. That funds our CIP for stormwater, as well as our operations and our personnel costs for our drainage crew. Currently, our project manager and myself manage all of the stormwater related items for the city. So we've been talking for a number of years, Melissa and I have, about the ideas of managing our workload, and this was always something that we, in the future at some point in time, maybe. I think with the recent rebuilds and the impacts of that is put on our staff, that we think now is the right time to move into that next level to support this position. Listed about 10 tasks that this position will support. I'm not going to go through all those, but we can highlight any of those if you want to. Those 10 tasks are things that we take care of now, Melissa and myself, so I think this, as far as workload management, it will help us and to provide better service for all the things that we do in the Public Works Department. Compensation for this employee, we envision it being a salaried position, professional engineer. Total with all benefits and extras would be around $110,000. We do not expect to have to purchase an additional vehicle. That would be shared between this position and the senior project manager. The only other option would be to continue doing what we've been doing and continue a contract, at least now, like we've been doing with our stormwater engineer to manage the residential reconstruction projects. We don't think that's necessarily the best use of funds. We can have a year-round resource, full-time resource that can handle a lot more than just the residential rebuilds, but help us in all these other areas that I had listed. Funding for this position will be the stormwater utility fee, so it won't come from the general fund. We would propose to use the remaining funds for our consultant after we get this position hired in a few months. And then a part of the 2019 budget would be funded through the stormwater utility fee, but as a full-time resource going forward. Be happy to answer any questions.
Sorry. Ted. Chad. Engrossed in the memo.
I'd like to make a motion for approval of the addition of a stormwater engineer, FTE, for the Public Works Department.
Chad.
I think it's a good idea. I have a question, and maybe you addressed this, forgive me if I missed the detail. But having just entered into a contract or planned contract for this work to be contracted out for the year, what's the status of that contract related to this FTE? Are we, by the nature of that contract, able to get out of that contract when we hire this person? How does that relate? How does the hire of a new full-time employee relate with the status of that contract?
Once we get approval from council to move forward with this, we will let them know that we'll be terminating the contract. It will take several months to actually have a new person on board. So the remaining funds at that point in time, they'll help us until that point in time, but we can stop the contract at that time.
You'll forgive me for not remembering the details of the contract, which we had before us, but the details of that contract allows us to wind that down, and we're paying on a monthly pro rata or something, so we won't be in significant loss of funds that's double
Right,
spent.
I think there's an actual time frame in all of our contracts.
All of our contracts have a termination for convenience clause in them, And I think it's like 3 days or something. I mean, we can terminate that.
Paid out on a monthly.
We would pay them for all the services that they
Rendered up to that
render.
point.
It's a cost as we need it. It's not a certain amount to pay them a lump sum. It's only as the
Fantastic.
hours that they.
Great, thank you.
Keith, you've got approximately 110,000. Does that consider FICA withholding everything involved? Workers' comp, the whole bit? All the
It includes
taxes?
the salary and the 35% adder that we put on to an employee for benefits and those other costs. So I think it includes all the taxes and everything from my understanding.
Is that
Yes.
included? The only thing is, you know, once an employee, that's just added. We don't have any increased population. We're just increasing our workload. I'm just I'm opposed in hiring, taking on more.
Understand.
Jory and then Andy.
So what is the amount that we have spent on contracting for a stormwater engineer on a given annual basis?
We've only started that in around November of last year. We haven't done it prior to that point in time. It's been done by Melissa and myself, all those items. So it's only like 30 or 40,000. I don't know the total. It's between 30 to 35,000 since we started in late October till now.
So you
Roughly.
think that we would need then a full-time person? Do we have other stormwater needs other than what we're looking at 68th and Mission Road?
Yes. Basically, our most significant stormwater issue is rebuilding the existing system. It's not about flood control projects necessarily. There's still some areas around Prairie Village that have issues, but it's one of the big things this person will do is manage CIP projects. And rebuilding that system is a significant part. We spend almost $1 million a year on that program, whether it's a stormwater related program or just rebuilding infrastructure program. And this position would mainly manage all of that work.
So would we be using the same people that we're using now for stormwater, or are we going to be putting it out for bid, or how do you?
We currently have hired a consultant to help us with primarily only the residential rebuild parts of the drainage of the list of tasks that this position will do. That's primarily what they've done since October. We envision this resource doing a lot more than just that, doing other things, all the things related to stormwater that I have listed in the memo.
So would this then preclude us from, as we discussed earlier, adding additional staff for codes?
Doesn't have anything to do with codes. This would
I mean, as far as salary goes, because we had talked about what a difficult time our codes person is having with all the new builds and Meadowbrook and homes that need inspections.
That would come from the general fund. This is coming from the stormwater fee specifically.
Okay, thank you. I missed that. Thanks for clarification.
Andy.
You know, in keeping with what Jory was getting at and Brooke as well, I just want to kind of understand how the math works in terms of what the engineer will be doing for us. Does every tear down and rebuild have to have a runoff study done? Is that something that you're doing now? I mean, what I do want to get at is, if we haven't required this $110,000 every year for the last 3 or 4 years, and you and Melissa have been doing the stormwater management engineering for us, I just need a feel of you know, where we're saving beyond, you know, yours and Melissa's time. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay.
You know, the residential rebuilds is something that's only ramped up in the last couple of years.
Right.
So historically, that was not a part of the equation. Now that it is added, I think we were already thinking that this could be something we wanted to do in the future, but that is the one thing that triggered it. And if we're gonna spend upwards of $100,000 a year on consultants to help with stormwater management, Melissa and I feel there's a better way of doing that, would be giving those tasks that we're giving to an engineer now to a full-time resource, but also having that person manage other activities related to stormwater that we can do better than we're doing today, and take part of the load off of Melissa and Mai's shoulders to get those things done better, more proactively, better than we even have in the past.
And every tear down is going to require some kind of runoff study.
We do. Every rebuild, and I think every addition over, I think 400 square foot will require a drainage study to show how they are impacting their neighbors, how they're managing water on their site.
And that's precisely the kind of thing we didn't have a lot of in the past, are looking to a lot of in the future, and is what the consultant is doing for us now.
Yes.
Thank you.
My concern is that if we didn't have it in the past, how far into the future are we going to need it? And when you take on and create the position of an FTE, then you have that liability going forward. When it's a contract, you can eliminate that need and say in 3 or 4 years, but in 5 years, we don't need that. We have the employee.
I absolutely appreciate your comment. I mean, that's the reason why we've been very sensitive to ever requesting additional resources. We know that it can't just be to meet a short-term need. We realize fully we can hire consultants in our short-term need, if it's truly a short-term need. Now, if it's projecting on into the future, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with residential rebuilds into the future, but they're always going to be a component. I know with all the other things that on this list that the stormwater engineer will manage, there are things that I am doing, things that Melissa's doing, that will help our city and help me manage the department in a better way than we have in the past. And I don't take it lightly at all adding staff. It's very, you got to be very careful about that, just as you're saying. And I am 100% confident this will be a resource that will be fully utilized on into the future, not just this year and next year, but on into the future.
Keith, I have a question on, do you know how long the stormwater fee has been? 4 cents?
Started in 2009.
So it's been 8+ years. It's been the same number.
Yeah.
Okay.
About that.
Do you know anything about how one goes about changing that? Is that
Maybe I don't understand your question. Say that again.
I'm sorry. So the stormwater fee has been 4 cents since 2008.
We've changed it a couple of times since then, only small amounts. We can change it at any time. I've been resistant to changing it until I can come to council like we do with streets and say, we need to raise the stormwater utility fee. Right now, it's been held constant for the last several years. 5 years maybe. I don't know the exact last time we adjusted it.
Okay. Doubtless in that time, construction costs have gone up.
Right.
Okay.
What I hope to be able to do is with the stormwater engineer, at some point in time, be able to come back and make a presentation and have a 5-year, a 10-year CIP plan for how we're going to reinvest in all of our infrastructure drainage-wise, and maybe support increasing that over time if we see we need to do that. But that's a discussion for the future.
Okay. Chad?
I just want to make sure I understand the motion that Councilmember Odell has made. Under this new process and procedure, that the motion is for the Council Committee of the Whole to approve this recommendation, which would then come before the council at our next meeting for final approval. Is that right? Or at a future meeting for final approval? Great. Well, I'm supportive again of the motion. Ready to vote.
Thank you. How much does the stormwater management fee generate per year?
About $1.6 million.
Oh, in 1 year, 1%. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. What? Voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. excuse me while I page through. Oh, there we are. I think we're done.
Motion
Motion
to
to reconvene.
Motion to adjourn the council
Motion to
committee of the
adjourn.
whole back into the, back to the city council meeting.
Okay.
I move it.
Great, thank you, Chad. And voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Any opposed?
Council announcements are in your packet, and go ahead, Sheila, go ahead. Sure, go ahead.
I just wanted to let everybody know that the Environment and Recycle Committee voted unanimously to cancel their Earth Day event for lack of resources. So it's probably for the best, but I just, if anybody was looking for.
Lack of human resources?
Human
Okay.
resources and time,
Okay,
so, next year.
all right, thank you. Any other announcements?
I
Tucker?
just want to add on top of that, and it was really just because of the transition of, we've got a bunch of new committee members, and it's just a short amount of time, and so we all thought it was best. But they'll be back at it even better next year.
Thank you. I'd accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, one item. I hear you. It concerns me the same. I don't know why. Why is it written in stone that once we have someone, we can't terminate them? I mean,
It's government.
personal
It
business.
never gets small.
Well, and okay, well, and at the same rate, and this feeds into the whole budget discussion, which is,
Then you have to budget for that person.
well, I assume he's done that by the time he comes to us. Now, here's the question, if you look at this, and I've looked at this 50 different ways at 10 different times, our operating expenses are a constant 30 cents of our capital structure. If we have $90 million, we have a $27 million budget. If we have a $100 million CapEx, we have $30 million budget. It just is. It's weird to watch. The big
Increasing population, I can understand.
I know, and I don't, and Brooke, I don't understand where along that line, and when you lay this up against inflation, which was my question, really, and that is, why in a landlocked city do we outpace inflation when it comes to, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, I would just like a better explanation of more than, the $500,000 that's work comp has gone up 40%. Okay, great, it's now 700,000. That doesn't explain, that $200,000 increase in work comp that comes from that corner over there. Because every time we ask that question, workers' comp went up 40%. I don't care if it tripled. That doesn't explain the budget as a whole.
No, then work out something else, cut something else here.
Well, even if it's true, I look at it and go, okay, well, our budget, that went up 200,000. Why did our budget go up 3 million?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
Percentage of.
yeah. 1 to 2 is 100%, but it's